Buongiorno da Mariarosa Mancuso, buongiorno ai lettori di Book City e a chi ci ascolta, e buongiorno a Jonathan Lee, che è l'autore nostro ospite. In questa chiacchierata parleremo del Il grande errore, che è il titolo del suo romanzo, è uscito da Sura. È un romanzo, ve lo dico, bellissimo, sono parziale, su New York, su chi l'ha architettata e su chi ne ha pensato il piano urbanistico. Leggendo il libro di Jonathan Lee ci rendiamo conto che, tutto quello che abbiamo in mente, anche da lontano, da New York, anche senza esserci mai stati, anche, guardando i film per esempio, è opera di questo misterioso, perché non lo conosciamo attualmente, misterioso uomo che si chiamava Andrew Green, poi diventerà Andrew Aswell Green, che ha pensato tutta New York. Central Park? Beh, è opera sua, l'ha pensato lui. La biblioteca pubblica? È opera sua, l'ha pensata lui. Central Park è tutto finto, per esempio, ogni cascatella, ogni sasso, hanno dovuto radere al suolo un intero quartiere di casupole per questo parco, perché a New York non c'era nulla dove passeggiare. Questo secondo Andrew Green, che veniva dalla campagna. Questo architetto, nel senso dell'architettare proprio, del pensare la città, ha anche, dato origine alla grande New York, come la conosciamo ora, la New York unita a Brooklyn e agli altri quartieri, e si intitola, l'abbiamo detto all'inizio, Il grande errore. Il grande errore, nel 1898, era il grande errore di costruire, mettere insieme questa grande New York. Andrew Green era un uomo molto odiato per questo e il grande errore, in parte, perlomeno, è questo che riguarda la città. Jonathan Lee poi magari, se vuole, ci dirà qualcos'altro. Io ho una grande curiosità. Jonathan Lee è inglese, adesso però vive a Brooklyn, mi sembra. Che cos'è che ha fatto scattare la scintilla per questo racconto di New York assolutamente straordinario?
Thank you so much for having me here and for this kind interview. The novel started for me when I moved from England to New York 10 years ago, and I was walking in Central Park one day, and in a quiet area of the park I came across a stone bench which was dedicated to this guy Andrew Haswell Green, and I'd never heard of him before. And it called him the father of Greater New York and creating genius of Central Park. So I took my phone out of my pocket and I started to look into his life. And I was amazed by two things. Firstly, how little information there was about him available. And secondly, by the fact that the little bits of information that were available suggested he'd created so much of New York City.
Ha fatto davvero moltissime cose, forse una panchina a Central Park è un po' pochino per ricordarlo, però questo ha consentito a Jonathan Lee di scrivere questo libro, che parte, dalla drammatica fine, di Andrew Green, lo chiamiamo così perché questo era il primo nome che ebbe all'anagrafe, poi il middle name arriva dopo perché è più chic per chi deve muoversi tra i gentiluomini di New York. Andrew Green fu ammazzato davanti alla porta di casa a 83 anni. Un delitto in pieno giorno, era ora di pranzo, alla presenza di svariati testimoni, Ed è da qui che Andrew Green parte, anche per raccontarci quella New York, di inizio secolo, il secolo era appena cominciato, dove i maiali giravano randagi per le strade.
That's right. Yeah, the novel begins with Green's dramatic death, and there's of course always something fascinating about a murder, I think, but especially in his case, he was such a private man who kept such a low public profile in a sense, even while he did such great public work for the city, while creating Central Park, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the New York Public Library, the American Museum of Natural History, taking a role in Brooklyn Bridge, and so much else besides. He kept himself quite private, and for him to be murdered on Park Avenue at the age of 83 in broad daylight, as you say, on Friday, November the 13th, an unlucky day, was quite extraordinary. So the book became exploring the mystery of his murder and also the mystery of the life that lies behind that murder.
Uno scapolo in realtà è sempre un po' sospetto. 10 anni, diceva Jonathan Lee, da quando ha pensato questo libro a quando il libro poi è uscito, magari un po' meno, per il tempo della traduzione, dell'edizione. Io credo che, gli editori non abbiano avuto il minimo dubbio, perché è un romanzo, insisto, molto bello, molto ironico anche. Io vorrei sapere quante ricerche ha fatto e quanto ha inventato naturalmente, perché un romanziere magari qualche libertà se la prende. In particolare mi ha colpito, quello che lei scrive a proposito del modo di leggere i libri di Andrew Green, che si rende perfettamente conto, per essere cresciuta in campagna, dove, l'unico lavoro da architetto, da urbanista era spostare il recinto delle pecore, cito precisamente dal libro di Jonathan Lee, e si rende conto di non avere le maniere giuste e allora leggeva i libri, ma li leggeva così, scrive Jonathan Lee. E io vorrei sapere se questo dettaglio è suo o l'ha trovato da qualche parte. Le prime 5 pagine, le ultime 5 pagine, poi altre 5 pagine dall'inizio, poi altre 5 pagine dalla fine e man mano, sperava che gli si svelasse il segreto del libro. Io credo che nessuno dei lettori che ci ascolta a Book City abbia mai avuto un modo di leggere così.
Yes, I mean, a big breakthrough for the research for me was going to the New York Historical Society Library, which is near Central Park, and speaking to a librarian there, and her being able to find for me these boxes of Andrew Haswell Green's diaries and letters that no one had checked out of the library for many years. And when I opened those boxes and kind of blew away the dust, I could read his actual diaries from when he was a teenager, which was fantastic. And I think 3 or 4 volumes of diaries from the 1840s. And one of the things he would write down in his diaries were the books that he was reading at the time to try and educate himself, and Milton's poetry and parts of the Bible, and speak political speeches, and he would make little notes about the things that he read. And I noticed that he would make notes about the beginning of each thing, and then notes about the end of everything he read, and then sometimes he would make notes about the middle. So it became my conclusion that this very busy young man who was trying to educate himself would read the beginnings of things and the ends of things, and then the middle. but speculation on my part. And there were many things that were invented in the novel, although I think every character that appears is based on a historical figure. There are no completely made up characters.
Neanche l'ispettore che indaga, l'ispettore McCluskey, neanche la governante. La storia della governante, per esempio, è fantastica. La governante di Casa Green.
Yes, so Inspector McCluskey, the detective who is investigating in the book Andrew Haswell Green's murder, is based on the real detective who left some notes behind and appeared in various news articles. And there wasn't much information about Inspector McCluskey, but I had his name. And I had 2 facts about him that kept popping up. One fact was that he was this kind of macho guy who all the criminals in New York City were scared of, because on St. Patrick's Day, he would go and raid all of the establishments in one area of New York and arrest everyone. And, you know, they were all scared of him. And the second thing, which felt like an opposite fact, was that when Topsy the elephant, an elephant that was really executed in Coney Island in New York around this time, when that happened to Topsy the elephant, Inspector McCluskey thought that was very cruel. So on the one hand, he was this macho guy who arrested criminals, and on the other hand, he was an elephant sympathizer. So those 2 facts brought him to life for me.
Ebbene sì, stiamo parlando anche di un giallo, c'è un morto, c'è anche il nome di un colpevole, bisogna trovare il movente, e abilmente Jonathan Lee alterna questi capitoli di investigazione a una vera e propria storia di New York. Ma perché ce l'avevano tanto con Andrew Green? Perché la grande New York suscitava queste rabbie, addirittura omicide?
Yes, good question. I think you know, it's not giving away too much of the story of the book to say that one of the mistakes in the title, the great mistake, or the error, is that he was killed in what seems to have been a case of mistaken identity. But the person who shot him on Friday, November 13th, 1903, believed that that this man, Andrew Haswell Green, had been involved with a woman that the person with the gun loved. And as I sort of reinvestigated the crime, it revealed all sorts of layers of absurdity that appealed to me as a novelist, where I realized that you know, he was probably searching for another man called Green. And I don't know what it's like in Milan, you know, in where I grew up in the UK, or in New York, there used to be a phone book where you can look at people's surnames and find out where they live. And I think this man decided that someone called Green had stolen the woman he loved, and he went searching for people named Green.
E quindi questo innocuo, da questo punto di vista, signore ottantenne, viene ucciso da 5 colpi di pistola sotto gli occhi di tutti, e come unico ringraziamento ha una panchina nel suo Central Park. Anche Central Park fu un motivo di scandalo. Ma come succede che un ragazzino nato povero in provincia, e che arriva a New York facendo il garzone, e la descrizione del materasso dove questo ragazzino di 15 anni dorme fa venire i brividi a leggerla. Come succede che poi c'è la svolta, riesce a studiare, riesce soprattutto a laurearsi in legge, e poi, avrà una lunghissima carriera anche accanto a quello dell'architetto urbanista.
Yes, his upbringing was fascinating. So, he grew up in a town called Worcester, Massachusetts. He was working on a farm, helping his father and his many siblings on this farm. And then he was sent away to New York at the age of 15 to make some money and be useful. And he would sleep on this mattress in the basement of a store in New York where he was working as an apprentice. And he would sleep on his socks at night to try and dry them for the next day, because he only had a couple of pairs of socks. And he would get bitten by insects, which we would now probably call bed bugs. And slowly, after a couple of years of doing that, he started to seek out ways to improve himself and educate himself in the city. And the two things he really loved to do were to go walking and to read, as we've discussed. And he found that there were no safe places in the city really where he could go walking, except for the pleasure gardens that you needed to be kind of rich to be able to afford to go into these private gardens. There were none of the public gardens or parks that you find throughout Milan now or New York City now. And the other thing was that there were no public libraries, so he couldn't afford to take books out from private libraries. So I think it's interesting to think about how his upbringing, he created the New York that he wanted to see. He helped create New York Public Library and the Central Park that were missing when he arrived there.
Lei scrive: New York è come Dio, l'entusiasmo ce lo devi mettere tu, che è una descrizione bellissima di una città che allora offriva tante possibilità, continua a offrirne, però a costo di grossi sacrifici. E credo che questo si leghi ai titoli anche dei capitoli che lei ha dato a questo romanzo, Il grande errore, che vi ricordo è uscito da sola. Il grande errore ha titoli di capitoli particolari, diciamo così.
Yes, I decided to arrange the novel with chapter headings named after the different gates of Central Park. And the interesting things about the gates for Central Park is that, a little bit like chapter headings in any book, they're sort of invisible. They're not something you spend a lot of time thinking about. They're not sort of dominating the space. But at the time that Central Park was created, many people wanted Andrew Haswell Green and the designers he worked with to name the different entrances to Central Park after wealthy individuals in New York City. And that was usual at the time. But instead, he wanted to name each entrance to the park after a type of ordinary New Yorker, a type of ordinary citizen who would use that public space. And so it became Stranger's Gate or Woodman's Gate, Artist's Gate, gates named after different New Yorkers, which I think is really special. So that became the way that I organized my novel as well. And I tried to look at Green through different perspectives, the artist in him, the worker in him. I also found, I finished this book as the COVID-19 pandemic was happening, and it made me think about public space in our cities a lot. I think Andrew Haswell Green, the hero of my novel, was ahead of his time in seeing the ways in which public space are essential to our physical health and our mental health in cities. And, it has taken the pandemic really for us to appreciate public schools being open as a cause for celebration, parks being a place where we can all mingle with each other safely and be alone while not feeling alone, which is the same thing I feel when I'm reading a good book.
Io ringrazio Jonathan Lee, ho una grande curiosità di sapere se sta già scrivendo qualcos'altro se vuole rivelarci qualcosa e se no lo saluterò come saluterò tutti voi.
I am. I'm working on a new novel which is in the early stages and is more contemporary than this last one. And I'm also working on writing a television series that is about the Pan Am 103 disaster, the plane that crashed in 1988 over Scotland. So I'm working on those two things, and thank you so much for having me. Grazie, it's been great.
Grazie di nuovo a Jonathan Lee. Il grande errore è un libro edito da Sure. Grazie a tutti voi per averci ascoltato.